Welcome back to Democracy Docket's Candid Q&A series. My name is Crystal Hill, and today I'm joined by Debbie Mucarsel-Powell, a former House representative who's seeking to unseat Republican incumbent Senator Rick Scott. We talked about Hurricane Milton and the impact of Florida, as well as other topics from her time in Congress. As we speak, Hurricane Milton is, barreling towards Florida. Florida was just hit with Hurricane Helene. What is your message to Floridians who, are obviously scared about the storm? It's projected to be very dangerous. What should Florida residents know? And what do you say to them to sort of assure them, that it's going to be okay?
Well, the first thing that I want every Floridian, particularly on the West Coast, on the central coast of Florida, but even here in South Florida, all of us need to be heeding the warnings of our local elected officials. Florida is no stranger to very severe storms, but this is a storm that has magnitudes that we haven't seen in decades. And so every Floridian, if you have been ordered to evacuate, you still have time, please do so. Please listen to the warnings from your local officials and also listen to all the guidance after the storm. We have been posting a lot of information on our social media accounts. If you need information or special assistance, you can also go to one of our social media accounts. This is something that has me extremely, extremely concerned because, like you said, we just saw the effects and the impacts of Hurricane Helene just last week. There are communities in the Tampa Bay area where families have lost everything. We know that there are thousands and thousands of families that have lost their homes. They are trying to find a place for them to live. This is after Hurricane Helene, and this can just be a storm that is going to take even more homes away from people that are living in that area. And the problem is that we in Florida have experienced this before. We had a severe hurricane when Hurricane Andrew passed here in South Florida years ago. So we know what we need to do. We need to invest in resilient infrastructure. We need to make sure that we're doing everything we can to combat the effects of climate change. We know that our oceans are getting warmer and warmer. And so that is why we're seeing storms in this magnitude. And yet Rick Scott, the person that I'm running against, is one of the top climate denialists. He voted against FEMA funding. He has done absolutely nothing to bring funding to prepare infrastructures so that they can become more resilient to these storms. And so really, this is negligence from so many officials here in the state of Florida that have completely abandoned the state and the people that are living in this state by providing them with the accurate information that they need, by allowing builders and developers to build structures that are not ready to withstand these storms. And so there is so much work that we need to do in our state. But the first thing is making sure that we protect the public safety of everyone living in our areas that are going to be impacted by Hurricane Milton. My team and I are ready to go, ready to be there to assist anyone that is in need. And we will be watching from South Florida and as well being prepared in case we get some severe winds and flooding here in our area as well.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you mentioned, kind of like the overarching issues, or I guess the underlying issues, that's kind of exacerbating, what we're seeing. And, given that you are running for U.S. Senate against Republican Senator Rick Scott, who you mentioned, I'm curious if you were in his position, how you would be, navigating this. Would you be, talking to Floridians? Would you be, trying to get some form of federal funding? How would you, I guess, navigate this as a congresswoman?
Yeah, Crystal, well, first of all, I think someone needs to remind Rick Scott that he's not the governor, that he is the sitting U.S. senator, and he should have been in Washington, D.C. doing his job last week, voting to support the CR bill that went through the Senate floor that would provide funding for FEMA. The most important thing that you can do as a senator, as a sitting U.S. senator, is provide the funding that we are going to need, that we already need here in our state from FEMA. FEMA provides assistance to those people that won't receive coverage under some of their insurance plans. Another thing that I would have been working on is making sure that we provide the appropriate oversight so that insurance companies can pay for all the claims after Hurricane Ian. We just saw a report where some of these insurance companies that actually were brought on by Rick Scott here to the state of Florida have denied thousands of claims for families that were affected by Hurricane Ian just 2 years ago. So there's a lot that we can do. Of course, being on the ground, ready to go with assistance, being in direct communication with FEMA so that they're also on the ground, ready to assist as soon as the storm passes, asking for assistance from not only the federal government, but sometimes we need assistance from other states so that they can restore power right away. There's so much work, and being in communication with Floridians with direct contact so that they can listen to your guidance and your advice, not spreading conspiracy theories, which is another thing that Rick Scott has been doing. I mean, I think it is one of the most shameful things that I have ever seen with a person that's holding a position of power like Rick Scott, who has been tweeting about conspiracy theories about FEMA, which really gets in the way to provide disaster relief to so many survivors that were left behind by Hurricane Helene. And here we are again, getting ready for another storm. You have to hold the power of your office in a very, very strong way, holding your office as, you know, someone that has a huge responsibility to protect the public safety of the people that you're representing. And that starts by providing accurate information. It starts by making sure that all the federal agencies are ready to go after the storm hits so that they can assist families that are in need. Again, this is going to be one of the most severe and catastrophic storms that we have ever experienced in the state of Florida. And what we need is strong leadership that will guide every single Floridian despite the politics of the time. Nothing about this should be political, but Rick Scott has been taking advantage of the moment, becoming an opportunistic politician, spreading conspiracy theories, going around with his Navy hat and doing really nothing to help Floridians in the state.
We definitely have seen huge sort of just an onslaught of misinformation, surrounding Hurricane Helene and the government. And it is important definitely to cut through that noise. And, I know voting is probably the last thing on, Floridians' minds as, they're thinking about the storm. But, it is important that, there is an election that is coming up regardless. And so I'm curious, given that DeSantis, I believe, said that he would not extend the voter registration deadline, which I believe was yesterday. I'm curious if you agree with that decision and if, DeSantis and other Florida officials could maybe do more to ensure that as people are, evacuating for their lives, that they are able to still take part in the democratic process.
Exactly. And look, I actually made a call and a request from the governor to extend voting registration deadlines. In the aftermath of Hurricane Helene, we knew that there were thousands of people, like I just mentioned, that lost their home. The last thing that they're thinking about is whether to check their registration status or make sure that they're registered. And so we owe them to Floridians to be able to protect their voices in this election, to make sure that they have every opportunity to register and have the information available to them. But Governor DeSantis denied that request. And the pillar of our democracy is fair and free election, and making sure that every American has the right to vote, that every American has the freedom to be able to exercise that right. And it makes it very, very difficult when we are experiencing catastrophic events here in the state that are really getting rid of some communities, low-lying communities that have lost everything. So, when I was in Congress, actually, there was a bill, the For the People Act, that allowed people to be able to register to vote even until the day of election. There are many young people, as we know, that turn 18, sometimes days before election day. Some turn 18 on election day. They should be able to have the freedom to vote by providing the documentation that they're American citizens and having that opportunity to be able to have a say in what happens in the future of their state and the future of their country. And so it's shameful to see that he's protecting the rights of gun owners. He has completely relaxed some of the laws here in the state of Florida, allowing almost anyone to carry a gun. And that's something that he actually mentioned as we prepare for yet another hurricane, that he wants to make it easier for people to purchase weapons, but he doesn't want to make it easier for people to exercise their right to vote. And that's just shameful. And it's really an insult to democracy.
Mhm. And, I want to kind of switch gears a bit and kind of get back to your campaign. You mentioned, you served in the House from 2019 to 2021. You were a part of the, historic impeachment case involving former President Donald Trump. So what made you want to launch a bid for the U.S. Senate? And why do you think that you're a better choice for Florida than Scott?
As someone that is very proud to be a Floridian, I'm a mom, I have 3 kids. I have had the incredible honor of being able to represent an area here in South Florida in Congress. I have been seeing how this state has been hijacked by extremists and extremists who have been attacking all of our freedoms, all of our rights living in the state of Florida. I had been working for Giffords for quite some time, trying to reduce gun violence in our state. And I was witnessing firsthand the attacks against our freedoms in the state of Florida. Extremists are trying to tell Floridians what we can or cannot teach in our schools. They are attacking some of our most vulnerable populations, members of the LGBTQ plus community, which feel completely under attack, and they don't feel safe living in the state of Florida. And now we are living as women under one of the most extreme bans on abortion, a 6-week ban that was passed into law this year and came into effect on May 1st. And it's a ban that puts the life of many women at risk. We are hearing of stories right here in South Florida, a woman who was turned away by her doctor. Her pregnancy was not developing properly. She was sent home and she had a miscarriage. She lost almost half her blood and almost lost her life. It's an abortion ban that Rick Scott proudly supports. He says that he would have signed into law the 6-week ban if he were governor. And so we need to have leaders that are going to put politics aside and protect the rights and the freedoms of every Floridian. The freedom to be able to retire with dignity for so many seniors that have worked their entire life to get their Medicare and Social Security. The freedom to be able to work a good paying job and make it here in the state. And of course, the freedom for a woman to choose, free of government interference. And that's why I'm running. I want to make sure that my children live in a state where they have opportunities protected, but also their freedoms, the freedoms to love whomever they choose to love, to be whoever they want to be, regardless of where they come from. That's the incredible opportunity that I've had here in this country. And I want the same for my children and everyone's children living here in the state.
And, when I looked at your record, as a legislator in the House, you introduced, a number of what appeared to be pro-voting bills. I'm looking at my notes because I want to get this right. But your 2019 proposal that would prohibit certain challenges to a voter's eligibility, that definitely stuck out to me because we've seen kind of a rise in these like mass voter challenges that's resulted in a lot of litigation. You had a bill pertaining to automatic voter registration. I believe you also had legislation that would make it easier for people to vote on election day. Can you just talk about the intent behind this legislation? What kind of motivated you to pursue these types of proposals?
Well, having left a country in Latin America where I've seen firsthand what voter suppression looks like, what voter intimidation looks like, I want to make sure that, I left my home country once. I don't want to have to leave this country again because we have seen attacks against our democracy. And it starts with intimidating voters, using voter suppression tactics to keep people at home. And one of the bills that I also introduced was stopping the voters from being purged off the rolls. And that's exactly what's been happening here in the state of Florida. Republicans here have been trying to tout this message that this is a red state because they have 1 million more voters that are registered Republicans than Democrats. And it's just not factually correct. What's been happening here in the state of Florida is that the Republican Party has been purging voters off the rolls, mostly Democrats and independents. And that is a direct attack on an individual's right and freedom to be able to vote, to use their voice to determine the future of their state and of their country, like I said before. And so For us to be able to protect our freedoms, our democracy, it starts by protecting the pillar of our democracy, which is fair and free elections. People should be able to register on the same day as election day. They should be able to not face discrimination because you live in a low income area, whether you're a member of the Black community, a Latino community, which we've seen these voter suppression tactics disproportionately affect communities of color. You should not be under attack because they know, right? They know that when we vote, we win. And it's the same thing for young people. And one of the things that have been happening also in our country is that they've been using disinformation, creating chaos and division so that people stay home. It's another tactic, another voter suppression tactic, so that people feel apathetic, disengaged, done with politics. And I've heard this a lot in communities, particularly, of course, communities of color here in the state of Florida. And so we need to make it easier because a lot of people are working 50, 60 hours a week, and they can't afford to take an entire day off to go and wait in line for 2 hours to vote. We need to make sure that people have access to the ballot box, that early voting hours are extended, that they can, if they want to receive a vote by mail ballot, they should be able to without having to go through 5, 6, 7 different steps. Another law that was passed in the state of Florida is that if you were registered to vote by mail, they purged your voter by mail registration and you have to re-register in every election cycle. Well, if you're a senior, if you're an 80-year-old senior who's living in a senior home, it's much harder for you to actually first get that information and then have to re-register to vote by mail. I mean, what they're doing is they're trying to make it more difficult for people to exercise this right, to lift up their voices. They're trying to take away the power from the people. They want to be in control. The easiest way to be in control is by purging voters off the rolls, making it harder for people to vote, and of course, drawing these gerrymandered maps. And so for me, if we want to protect democracy, it starts by protecting the electoral process. The first thing that I would do if I were to get to the Senate is pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. And that would really be a first step to protecting our right to vote here in the United States.
You know, it's interesting. When I spoke to Colin Allred, for example, who's running for Senator Ted Cruz's seat, he also had a lot of goals for passing pro-voting legislation in Congress. But the conversation always seemed to come back to the filibuster. That was kind of cited as sort of the top reason that Democrats aren't able to get some of these proposals passed. What is your stance on the filibuster? Do you support getting rid of it in order to maybe more efficiently, pass legislation?
So the filibuster was originally created to allow for debate on the Senate floor. It was never intended to block legislation, which is exactly what the minority party has been doing in the Senate for the past few years. I think, and I truly believe, that we need to go back to a time where we have a truly representative democracy, and that's 50+1. That's what a true democracy looks like. I support pausing the filibuster, particularly to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. Like I said, that's one of the most important issues that we have and the biggest threat that we have facing democracy right now in our country. And we should absolutely pause it for 2 other pieces of legislation. One, to protect a woman's right to choose. We need to pass the Health Protection Act for women, which would codify Roe v. Wade at the federal level. And we need to pass a universal background check bill. Let's not forget, in this country, we are seeing a rise in gun violence. It is the most shameful thing that we are continuing to see these gun violence episodes all over the country, and politicians do absolutely nothing. Instead of protecting the life of our children, they're protecting the gun lobby. We must pass a universal background check bill. And so I would support pausing the filibuster for those 3 pieces of legislation.
Mm-hmm. And, I also wanted to ask about, the impeachment case, back in 2019, or I believe it was early 2020 that the vote happened to impeach Trump in the House over the Ukraine matter. I don't know if I have enough time to unpack the circumstances surrounding the first impeachment, but what struck me was, you describing Trump as being dangerous for democracy. And here we are, after two impeachments, and now he is two impeachments by the House, and now he's running for a second term. Do you still feel that he is dangerous for democracy? And do you stand by kind of your remarks and how you voted back in 2019? I know it cost, a lot of Democrats politically.
I stand by that vote. And I can tell you that, again, having left Latin America and understanding what it looks like when you see men or women hold on to power and use the power of the office for self-gain and self-enrichment, and in this case, to continue to hold on to power, violating the Constitution. I took my oath to protect the Constitution from domestic and foreign enemies very seriously. And I have read the Constitution several times, and I consulted with constitutional experts. I wanted to make sure that I made the right decision when I was serving in the Judiciary Committee. This was a very solemn moment for our country. It was not easy to take that vote, but I stand by the vote. And after what we saw on January 6th with the insurrection that was incited by the former president, and we are seeing more and more evidence directing us to that, I continue to believe that one of the biggest threats that we're facing to democracy is someone that would use democracy, use the electoral system to get into office, hold on to power, and then completely destroy the institutions that got that person there to begin with. That's exactly what happened in Venezuela. That's why we see a dictatorship in Venezuela with Maduro, who has stolen the election right now on July 28th. That's why we're seeing what we're seeing in other countries like in Nicaragua and in Cuba. But let me just say, one of the biggest threats to our democracy is Rick Scott. Rick Scott voted to overturn the election after the January 6th insurrection. He actually has continued to promote the big lie that there was voter fraud. And his campaign has not confirmed whether he would recognize the result of the 2024 election. This is the person that I'm running against, and he wants to become Senate Majority Leader. And so I think it's really important for the country to pay attention that this is an opportunity to stop an extremist like Rick Scott, an election denier like Rick Scott, someone that spreads conspiracy theories, from getting back to the Senate. I want everyone to just imagine for a second a world where you're going to miss Mitch McConnell. I mean, this is a person that committed Medicare fraud, the largest Medicare fraud in the history of this country, has been using his seat in the Senate to enrich himself. He is not to be trusted. He should not be anywhere near a position of power in our government like he has been over the past 6 years. And look, we have an opportunity to beat him right now in this race. We are statistically tied here in the state of Florida. Republicans are trying to convince everyone that Florida is not in play. Of course, they don't want people to come in and invest and help me win. Of course, they're saying that, but it's just not the reality. Floridians have been fighting back. I know I can beat Rick Scott. And actually, I need you to come and support my race at debbieforflorida.com. I'm asking everyone to support this race. With only 3 weeks to go, we can do it, but I can't do this alone.
I really did want to ask about Amendment 4, just because, we have seen ballot measures, crop up across the country in the wake of the Dobbs ruling. In Florida especially, there's been so many eyes on this ballot measure. Can you just talk about why you support Amendment 4 and why you think that Floridians should support it?
Well, first of all, Amendment 4 should never be a political issue. It's a not partisan issue. We have seen that Republicans, Democrats, and independents support a woman's fundamental right to make her own decision as it pertains to her body. This should be a decision that's between a woman, her doctor, her family, her faith, free of government interference, and absolutely free of people like Rick Scott that want to dictate what happens to a woman. It's very, very dangerous for many women living in the state of Florida right now, living under a 6-week ban. I already spoke about how it affects the livelihood of women, but this is also a safety issue. We know that women that live under these extreme bans face higher rates of violence against them. We have seen higher rates of maternal mortality rates. In Latin America, we actually, in certain countries like Colombia, we passed laws that would protect a woman's right and a woman's freedom to make that choice free of government interference because of those high rates of violence and high rates of maternal mortality. But what I tell everyone is that, look, as a mom, this is a very important issue. I have 2 daughters. I have a son. As a woman, of course, I don't want my daughters to be living in a state with less rights than I did coming to this country. But it's not going to mean anything if we pass Amendment 4 and then Rick Scott gets to the Senate and pushes for a national abortion ban. Rick Scott voted against access to IVF twice. He voted against access to contraception. And yet he's telling Floridians that he wants to protect access to IVF. So this is a very, very dangerous path to take, trying to limit a woman's ability to make this choice on her own with her doctor and her healthcare provider. Once they start attacking one right, they never stop there. And so, yes, I support Amendment 4. Everyone needs to vote yes on Amendment 4 to protect a woman's right to choose, because this is about not only our freedoms, our health, and our safety, it's also about democracy. I have said many times that a woman's right, when we start seeing attacks against women, they're attacking democracy as well, because when women organize, when we come together and when we create movements, we win and we protect democratic institutions. So it should be no surprise to anyone that as they're attacking our democracy, they're also attacking a woman's freedom and a woman's right to choose.
And lastly, I would be remiss if I didn't bring up, the significance, if you were to be elected to the Senate, you'd be the first Latina immigrant to, hold a seat in the Senate. The Senate especially could definitely be more diverse, I think, but also just even beyond that, your background as someone who, immigrated to this country, I'm sure that I'm sure that those democratic ideals, it seems like it really resonated with you. And now we're sort of seeing our democracy kind of potentially under attack. Could you talk sort of about the significance of you possibly being in the Senate and kind of how your background, I guess, informs how you view, these democratic ideals?
Yes, and representation does matter. And someone like myself who has lived in Florida for so long, my story is the story of so many Floridians living in our state. So many people that have had to leave their home countries because of political persecution, because of a rise in dictatorships, because they've lost the ability to be able to provide for their families. There's so many reasons why families have come to live here in our state. And so people understand the challenges that we're facing because they have faced those challenges themselves. It's the same thing for me. I understand the struggles of so many people living in our state and across the country because I've had to face those struggles. I started working at a minimum wage job when I was 15, and because of the incredible opportunities that I was able to receive in the United States of America, I'm now talking to you as the Senate nominee for one of the largest states in the country. I mean, this doesn't just happen by chance. This happens when you have someone that truly believes of what's possible, when you work hard enough, and when you have your community behind you. And so that is a voice that we need in the United States Senate. We need someone like myself that has seen what it looks like when you lose democracy and freedom, someone that has struggled and has worked and taken advantage of the opportunities afforded to them in this country and wants to work to protect those opportunities. I mean, there's so many reasons why my candidacy would be a great opportunity for us to also change this misperception of who Latinos are. Look, yes, Latinos care about immigration, but that's not the only issue that we care about. I mean, we care about working and good paying jobs and entrepreneurship, and we care about climate resiliency, and we care about gun safety. There are a lot of issues that we care about. And I think that sometimes that's missed at the federal level. We need a truly representative democracy, and it starts by electing a Latina to the U.S. Senate here in the state of Florida.
Thank you so much for tuning in to today's Candid Q&A. For all voting-related news, please subscribe to our free newsletters. Thank you.